Hey party people, in this video I'm going to teach you how to illustrate any stripe fabric. This video is not about teaching you how I illustrated this one specific swatch, but I'm going to show you a step-by-step method that you can use to approach any stripe fabric. So have a seat, grab your coffee, take some notes. Number one, you're going to select your media. I have some swatches here and some pictures and whatever to use for this video. And most of you who have watched my rendering videos know that I try to pull colors as close to my swatches as possible, but it's not always. I'm not gonna go by markers for every demo. So in my example sketch, you're gonna see that it's not the most perfect color match in the whole wide world, but you get the idea, right? You, on the other hand, if you're doing this based off of a fabric for a client, you need to get a much better match than that. So you're gonna select your media according to what your boss, your client, your teacher, what have you, tells you that you need to use. Of course, if you have creative freedom in that regard, that is the best. The method I'm gonna teach you, you can do with marker, with paint, with color pencil. It's just that with paint, you need to make sure that each step is dry before you proceed. When I'm doing something fuzzy and grainy like this, I like to use color pencils because it helps me with that organic fuzzy look. Something like this, where the lines are really clean and clear, you could do with marker and paint just fine. I mean, you can do something like this with like a very skinny dry brush, but that's technically more difficult than just using a color pencil. And y'all know, I'm lazy. I like doing things the easy way. The next thing you're going to do is draw your garment according to the drape of the fabric. So this is kind of a thick but squishy. It's not slinky and drapey like a matte jersey, silk jersey. It doesn't crinkle like an organza. Okay, it's soft and floopy and it doesn't hold wrinkles in it. Okay, so I drew it soft and drapey and kind of relaxed. And yes, I am going to actually render examples in a second. You're going to also draw your garment using your knowledge of wraparounds, making sure that things are wrapping around forearms, around necks, around waists, around hips. And if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of wraparounds, go watch that video. It's the first in the Drawing Clothes on Bodies series on the Drawing Clothes on Bodies playlist. And then you're going to fill in the background color of your garment, of your fabric, and then you're going to add the shadows. You see the darker cream color in here where I put in the shadows? And then you're going to lay out your stripe. This one, the direction is horizontal, so it's going horizontally. These have vertical stripes. This one, the designer of this dress is playing with the direction of the stripe to enhance the design. So we have vertical stripes here, and they're gathered. They get pinched in because they're gathered along the top. And then these, she's using the cross grain, so we have horizontal stripes. And then here, I keep saying she, we don't know if the designer is male or female. The designer cut the pattern pieces on the bias to create that 90-degree angle, that chevron. Cutting on the bias means you're cutting a garment on the diagonal at a 45-degree angle. You can do a 45-degree angle. Bias cut is really nice, especially with slinkier fabrics. It adds even more slinkiness, bias cut, silk charmeuse, evening gowns a la John Galliano, late 90s, early 2000s, right? And it's beautiful. It really adds to the drape. And that's why here, it kind of I call this a relaxed 90 degrees. Because technically at the seam, it is 90 degrees, but because of the slinkiness of the drape and the relaxed fit of the bodice, it kind of droops down and looks like it's less than a 90-degree angle. Pay attention to the direction of the stripe. Here, the stripes are all bunching together because of the gathering, and so they're kind of all going every which way. This one, the stripes are going along the jacket, but then they're going horizontally because the facing, which ends up being the lapel, is cut on the cross grain. If you look at this swimsuit, you see how the stripes up here are all parallel, but she has a dart here, which means the stripes come in, they get sewn together, and that's how it creates that V shape. I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. Number one, I don't do pattern making videos because pattern making is not my area of expertise. I know how to make patterns. I'm not an expert at it. And I like to make videos where I feel super confident about the knowledge that I give you. So no, I will not be making pattern making videos. Number two, this is not even a recommendation for a pattern making book on the pattern making. This is a recommendation on the pattern making book for its diagrams. I don't know if this book is good or not. I'm not dissing it. I'm not praising it. It's a pattern making book that I've had for a long time. I don't even remember when I bought it. This is not even the current edition. Anyway, so I have discovered that the best way to really figure out how stripes and polka dots and plaids and any kind of print works on the body and how you can learn how to accurately put prints on the body, if that's your jam, and it probably is since you're watching this video, the best way is to look at a pattern making book and pattern making diagrams. So since you're not needing the book for its instruction, you don't need to go buy the most expensive one. You don't even need to buy the most current one. So anytime you're wondering how the stripe would fall and wrap around the body and how it would hit the seams, go look up the category in a pattern making book like this. The grain is here, so we're going to lay the stripe along the grain, parallel to the grain. And at this point, it doesn't really matter what your stripe looks like because it's really about how it looks on the pattern and where it hits those seams. This is the inseam, this is the out seam or side seam, and this is your center back seam. This is along your butt crack. So a couple of things I want you to notice. You see how these stripes come in at an angle into your center back seam? Do you see the backs of these pants and how the stripe comes in at an angle into the center back seam? That's because it's going up into the pattern like that. You see how the slight triangle makes it look like an A, a capital letter A? I tell my students A is for apple bottom. And then my students get all mad at me because the week I show them this thing, they come back the next week and they're like, Zoe, all I can do is look at people's butts when they're wearing a patterned pant and finding the A. I'm like, don't be the gross creeper on the train, man. Anyway, so that goes in there like that. Whenever you have a dart, see here and here, it gets pinched in. So if you have a dart, and that's the fabric, and you're, if it's sitting like that, when this gets sewn together, you'll have this red line. See how it's at an angle? So now it's sitting like this. And then this is coming out, right? And then that is coming at an angle like that. The stripes will continue downward and then return to being parallel. But at that pinch, at the dart, it's gonna curve inward and sometimes get broken up into the seam. I am not gonna do this for every garment category. These pattern books, right? So they show you how to do this, right? Classic on Pure shows you how to do it. But when you get to the finished thing, you're always going to have this little double arrow line, and that means that's the grain, and that's how you can line up your stripes. Or you can, line up your stripes on the cross grain, or do the diagonal, design with your stripes, right? So that's how you're going to figure out the direction your stripes are going. Okay, another example, classic example, is this side seam. Notice how your side seam is here. See how I've drawn it? And the stripes go in to the side seam because this is a very curved seam. When you have a seam like this, here's the top bust, here's your side seam, there's your hip, and then there's your leg hole, right? And so your fabric is gonna sit like this, and your stripes are gonna sit like this. So that when you have the side seam of this bathing suit, okay, there's the top, there's the leg hole. Do you see this triangular shape? You're gonna put that in there. There's that triangular shape, and that triangular shape in there. And then this line, this stripe, it goes in there like that, and like that. And until it kind of smooths out and becomes more up and down, okay? See how it goes into the seam like that? And this is still curving but smoothing out, and then smoothing out until you get, well, it doesn't look straight in this picture, but it is running parallel to center front, which is more straight. The back is the same, where you can see it cut into the side seam, cut into the side seam at an angle. A lot of the time, the curves of the front and back don't match up, so don't worry about having like perfectly matching stripes at the side seam. You're like, Zoe, that looks hard. That looks like something you have to practice. Which point? The next thing we're going to want to do is scale down the fabric swatch, because let's say our average dude is like 5'10" to 6 feet tall. My average croquis figure for dudes is 10 inches tall. This one I blew up a little bit just for the purposes of the video so you guys could see more clearly. But yeah, he's still only like, I don't know, 13 inches tall. So you're going to have to shrink it down. And I use the palm to palm method. Okay, I lay my palm on my fabric. I line it up with one of the stripes. So my wrist, the bottom of my palm, is right on this stripe. And I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And 7 is kind of at the top of my palm. Dudes' palms are going to be a little bit bigger, and I tend to have small hands. And so I'm going to say like 8.5 would be a man's palm compared to mine. So what I would do is, here's his palm, here's the top of his palm, here is the bottom. Palms are about square, right? Same length as width. So I'm gonna say that's the size of his palm. We said it was 8.5 of these stripes across. So let's figure it out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, that's a little close together. Okay, so let's try this again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You get the idea, right? So that's about how far apart these stripes are going to be, shrunk down onto a figure this size. And you could do that with any of these swatches. Now we're going to render. Okay, we're going to render the stripe on there. And, you know, when you have a texture and you don't know how much of the texture to render, if it's even visible at all when you shrink it down this small, I like to use the 8-foot rule. I'll take a header like this and I will pin it somewhere, stick it on a corkboard, whatever, and then I'll step back about 8 feet and I'll render what I see from there. This technique is great for when you have a stripe like this, where it is clearly a stripe, but you're kind of like, when I scale that down, what the hell is going to happen because there's so many stripes? How many stripes is that across your palm, Zoe? Like 30? And so put it on a board and step back. And what you're going to see with something like this is almost more like a heathering effect. So instead of trying to draw individual stripes, what you're going to end up doing, or what I would do, is take a white colored pencil and just kind of softly heather that texture, because it looks more like a texture than an actual print. Now that we've got the instructions down, let's render. I am using the Winsor & Newton marker paper today. I'm still testing it out. It's pretty good so far. This one, the right side of the paper is on the top side. When I do my underdrawing, I use a really light touch with a light pencil. This is an H-lead 0.5 size. And I really just draw the bare minimum I need. Like, I plan on making this a rib knit collar, but I don't need to draw in the lines right now. So again, it's drapey, it's a loose fit, but it's not slinky, kind of drooping over the waistband and folding over, because it's an easy fit sweater. If this was done in a solid color, like if this is just like a straight plain red sweater, I wouldn't even bother putting in the pocket until the end, because I was just gonna color it red anyway. Since I want to break it up, I need to have that pocket placement there so I know where to break up the stripe. I'm using a Prismacolor in almond milk, and I'm using a Marvy Le Plume permanent in orange 821 for the shadow. I use a really light pencil when I'm doing the underdrawing because I don't want to smear a lot of pencil lead around the paper. And that's also why I don't put in a lot of details. I might as well just do that at the very end with my finishing pencil. If you pick up some of the pencil, just wipe it off on a scrap piece of paper. And this is why usually I tend to, when I'm working with markers, draw on the wrong side and render on the right side of the paper. But I'm testing this paper right now. I want to see how much it smears and stuff. But yeah, you can do that with marker paper because it's semi-sheer. It's not sheer like tracing paper, but you saw how easily I could see my fashion figure right through it, right? And then we're gonna put in the 3 kinds of shadow. So let's say that's my light. So we're gonna put in the shadow on the dark side away from the light. And then we're going to place shadows under the light as this turtleneck kind of floops in, drapes flooping in. And then cast shadows, this sweater folding over the waistband, this turtleneck casting a tiny separation shadow there. Armpits are always dark because the torso is casting a shadow on it. Little shadow behind the cuff, rolled up cuff. And let's say I want to put in a drape kind of shadow there. So we've done our grain line studies, and so we know that our stripes are going this way. Now, the stripes are going to be perpendicular, 90-degree angle, from the direction of the limb. So this arm sticks out like this. So the stripe is going to sit on his arm like this. Okay, it's not going to be sitting parallel to whatever, the ground. If the arm is sticking out like this, then yeah, the stripe is going to run like this because the arm is lifting up. So pay attention to the direction of the body part you're covering with your garment. Now back to the wraparounds thing, like that again is really pivotal to understanding stripes. You're not going to draw straight stripes. Maybe some sections will look straight, but overall it's going to curve and drape and bend and fold around the body. So you're going to have like a slight arcing over the chest. And then as you get closer to the waist, it's going to straighten out, and then it's going to start arcing a little bit downward. You're going to see the arcs this way. Now this forearm is going in this direction, but it's coming towards us. It's foreshortened, so the curves are going to be a little rounder. See how I had drawn that cuff? Okay, because you're seeing the foreshortening. If none of this makes sense to you, please go watch that wraparounds video. It will all start to come together. Okay, so that's how we're going to draw the stripes on this guy using this scale of stripe with this color pencil I'd previously chosen. Okay, see how all those steps are coming together? Always be looking at your fabric. Where the hell is it? There we go. Okay, so again, arcing a little bit. We've got that scale. We know that it's uneven, and so I'm not trying to draw perfectly smooth stripes. If I were, I would be using a fine liner instead. But I'm trying for the broken, uneven, textured. And then when it hits drapes or the side, it cuts off. It cuts off at the pocket. And then this is going in this direction. It cuts off at the drape. And what I like to do is make sure that in my shadow areas, the stripe also looks shadowed. For something like this, I would just kind of punch in some of these stripes in here. And it's uneven. So again, I'm not going to try to make it just like smoothly dark in one section, but I am going to try to emphasize a little bit in the shadow areas in an uneven way, if that makes sense. So that we're still seeing some of the shadows happening as things dip. I'm going to take, this is a 2B lead 0.7 size, and we're going to go in and put in the finishing details. Here's my rib knit turtleneck collar. The sleeves don't get a rib knit cuff. This is just the fabric rolled up into a cuff. Now, if you want to illustrate this texture, what I would do is I would take a color pencil. Do you see the difference in the textures here? You see the texture in this sweater? All I did was put in a loose texture using this color pencil. This is a Derwent Color Soft in Peach C560. You know, the texture does run horizontally, and so I'm making sure that my pencil marks, I mean, they follow the drape, but they do run horizontally like it does on the fabric. I mean, you could do this texture first. It really depends on your fabric. You know, do a test swatch. Put the stripe on top of your texture instead. And then again, make it dark in the shadow areas. When you have broad stripes like this, you have to especially make sure that the shadow areas are shadowed clearly, or you will lose the 3D effect of your garment. A little pencil skirt, midi length, because I'm really feeling the below the knee action these days. And then there's a little bit of that action drape, and I'm gonna put in some slash pockets because we all know how I feel about pockets. We're gonna put in a center front seam in here so that I can put in a nice chevron stripe. So again, let's run through the steps. Select my media. I'm gonna go for something kind of like this. So I'm gonna use markers, and I have my pinks and my creams and whatnot here. And then I'm gonna draw the garment with the drapes, and we figured out the direction. That's her palm, and look at this stripe. It's palm size. So this stripe is palm size, and so this is her palm here. And so that's gonna be the width of one stripe. If you're doing a chevron or any kind of diagonal, don't start it up here like making this little point. Oh my God, it makes me bananas. So start about here. Make sure that at least at the seam it looks 90 degrees. And then you can kind of wrap it around your hips so that things look more 3D. And so we're wrapping this around her hips. And then, now this is the size. So So we have quite big stripes here. Wrapping around, wrapping around. It kind of breaks up because of these wrinkles. If you have a stripe this big, you don't even have to do the whole background color. You can just do the alternating. I could do the whole thing with the background color. That's how I did this one. I dropped the whole background color. But that one is a smaller piece. You don't have to waste marker. And then this is my stripe color. And just trying to avoid smearing that pencil around too much. And yeah, this is not the best illustration in the whole wide world because I'm trying to move fast for the tutorial. This is that same Marby Le Plume Orange 821. Here's my shadow placement for this stripe, this stripe, this stripe, and then in these drape lines, right? And then I'm going to take this and again continue the shadow placement along the dark side of the hip, and then a little bit here. The drape comes in here like that, and so we're seeing some of those wrinkles. I am seeing that this paper, the marker stays wetter longer a little bit, which is kind of nice. So you can kind of do a bit more blending and softening. So I'm actually looking forward to playing with this paper more because of that. So you have to shadow both, especially whether it's this skinny, but especially if it's a bigger stripe. So this one, she has some navy blue banding, and so I'm gonna get in here. And again, if you are doing this with paint, make sure that your paint layers are 167% dry, because if you don't, these edges will start blurring together and getting fuzzy, which is awesome if that's the effect you're going for. But this is a very crisp, clean edge. Okay, this navy is not dark enough, but whatever, you get the idea. Few more tips, okay? When you are choosing your background color, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the bigger color. Something like this, I would still use the white as the background color, even though the blue-green stripe is thicker. Because it's way easier to have a white jacket, to put in gray shadows on a white jacket, and then put in blue-green stripes on top, than it would be to, it's always easier to put dark on top of light when we're working with watercolor, with marker, like that. Something like this, or like this, where there is no background color, you would approach it like this, where you draw in the stripe and then you paint in the individual stripes and then you shadow in the individual stripes. Something like this where you can't tell, just pick whatever the lighter one is. I personally would put in the gray and then shadow the gray and then put the black on top. White and then black on top. White and then use a black fine liner. Dark gray. And because these double pinstripes are kind of hairy and soft and fuzzy looking a little bit, you can get away with using a white colored pencil. I find the white one in the Luminance 6901 series is very potent. It's the most potent one I've tried so far, but I still have like half a dozen I'm still testing. You can also try a charcoal pencil in white. Those tend to be pretty potent as well. Okay, as you can see on this little scrap, you can see how clearly the white shows up, even on a light blue like that. So choose your medium, layer your colors, and anytime you're testing colors to match back to a fabric exactly, test in the way that you're going to use them. So if you're gonna put a stripe color on top of a background color, test it like that in the marker stage. If you're going to put a shadow color on top of a regular color, that's how you should test it, because these two markers, they look like this layered on top of each other, but this pink doesn't look like this by itself. It looks like that. And in this case, the difference is a little bit subtle, But in some cases, it's very, very different depending on what colors you're using to layer, okay? So always test on top of each other. Like if I were putting a white stripe on this, I will put this color down on top of the light pink and then test out how my white looks on top of that, okay? So always test in this way. You know that rule, measure twice, cut once, okay? It is the savior of wasted materials. Same thing for this. When you're mixing paints, when you're picking markers and color pencils, test twice, color once. And again, if you have a lot of stuff going on in your fabric and you're not sure how to approach it, stick it on a wall, step back 8 feet. What do you see? What are the important elements you see? And what are the things you're gonna see when things get scaled down to a 10 to 12 inch figure? That's what you're gonna illustrate, screw the rest. Who cares what you can see at this, like right up against your face, okay? It's really about the impression of the fabric, not every single little dot. All right, I feel like that was enough information for one day. Go watch the Drawing Clothes on Body series. If you need fashion figure templates, you know, they're on sale at my Etsy store, zoehong.etsy.com. You know what I'm gonna say? Hashtag always be practicing. Hashtag practice not magic, because we are not made of magic, we are made of practice. And hashtag if your first one sucks, you're right on track. May the stripe be with you. Get to striping, and I will see you in the next video.